Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Purposeful Conversations with me, Emmy, here in the Pami Code Facebook community. I know that so many of us are still in lockdown right now. And for me, I'm actually feeling a little bit tired. It's surprising because yeah, we're just at home, we're doing things, but yeah, my kid is here, so homeschooling. Have my husband. Well, my husband is helping me out, so that's actually nice. But it's a lot of stuff. Surprisingly, that even if we're just home, it's actually quite busy and a lot of things going on. And from time to time, yeah, I'm starting to feel a little bit tired. I don't think I'm burned out yet, but just to be sure, I introduced a burnout expert in our community today to have this conversation about the situation that we are in and also to talk about her own burnout story. So without further ado, let's all welcome Caitlin Donovan. Hi, Caitlin. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Emmy. Thanks so much for having me.
Wonderful. It's so great to have you here. And I know that I'm calling you from New Jersey. How are things going on over at New Jersey?
New Jersey is on complete shutdown. Of course, we can go to grocery stores, but parks, beaches, trails, everything is closed. And things seem to be, we seem to be on the flattening curve time, but I don't think anything will change for another month or so.
Yeah, I've noticed I've been watching the news because you're so close to New York, and it's quite
Yeah.
worrying. Like the number of cases there, we do have friends and family in that part of the world. How are you coping? I know that you actually got sick as well yourself.
Yeah, both my husband and I got sick. His doctor seems to think it was the coronavirus. We were not able to get tested because there's not enough tests here, and they're only testing if you're having shortness of breath and you need to actually be admitted to the hospital. So it seems that we both had mild cases, but for me, it was 2 weeks of being unable to get out of bed, physically unable, did absolutely no work. I could either watch TV or read fiction. I couldn't read anything serious. I could read fiction that it was, just sort of something silly, but nothing else. Fever, chills. I had a fever for six days or so. Um, Good. I had no appetite, so I lost weight in the beginning. Everybody's worried about gaining weight during coronavirus, so I'm kind of
You
like
were
balancing it
losing
out.
weight.
Yeah. I didn't eat for 10 days probably. So yeah, it was a rough intro. This was just at the beginning once everything got shut down, and
Mm.
things in New York City are totally crazy. It's really out of control, and my acupuncture office is in New York City, so just traveling back and forth on the train and going into Midtown a couple of times a week, just put me at danger. And my husband works at a big international corporation where there's 300 people in the
Everybody.
building, so yeah.
Well, I'm glad that you are better now and that you've recovered. Did you feel exhausted from that experience? Because I can imagine if you've been that sick, it's actually taken a toll on your body.
Yeah, it took me, once the fever was done and I started to like come back to life, it took me another week to sort of, after the fever ended, to feel normal again. And now I'm totally fine. I can exercise. We went on a big long hike the other day. Everything's fine. It's like it never happened.
Well, I'm glad that you're better now, and if you didn't tell me, I wouldn't have a clue that you've been unwell. But yeah, for me personally, I actually do enjoy being in lockdown, having to spend time with my family here. In terms of my business, not much has changed because my business is online. I see clients online. So in that respect, I'm unaffected. But in terms of the situation here at home, because school is out, my husband works at the university. He's also here all the time. There's a lot to do because now we have to cook, we have to do homeschooling, I have to clean a lot because I have a big boy and a small boy. You know what boys are like, when they are at home. So there's a lot of cleaning going on right now. So I do feel a bit tired, but I don't really consider myself burned out, compared to when I was working at the university, when I'm just absolutely crying. It's just, I'm just so tired. Now I'm just tired, but not burned out. So can you tell me a little bit, what's the difference, being the burnout expert? What's the difference between tired and burned out?
I think especially right now with the time that we're in, we need to take a moment to recognize that part of our fatigue, part of our collective tiredness that so many of us are feeling right now is simply a part of the emotional reaction to what's happening in the world. And dealing with the level of emotional burden at the moment is costing us a bunch of energy and not leaving us with as much energy as we would normally have to get through our days. Right. So I think this is tired. This is just, there's a little bit too much going on. There's also a lot of emotions to process, and we only have so much energy, and we have a couple of extra, even if we don't have more to do, we have different things to do. And that adjustment period that we have to go through, the changing of things costs a significant amount of energy. If you had to cook dinner 4 nights a week before because you were ordering in once, but now you have to cook lunch and dinner every day, it's not the end of the world because you can make bigger meals, you can get leftovers, you can do, whatever. However, it is something that you have to think about,
Planning.
consider, shift, plan. You have to plan grocery shopping differently because you can't get to the stores as frequently, and you might not get the ingredients that you want, and you have to, so there's just more effort being made in so many areas right now that most people are feeling a little bit tired.
Wow, that's actually quite good that you raised that, because some people couldn't get their head around. It's like, why am
Yeah.
I feeling so tired when there's actually less to do? But you are right. We're not really taking into account the emotional energy that we're putting in, because I know that people are feeling worried, and,
Yeah.
they have that anxiety as well. The change of routine, adjusting to the new routine, and they haven't taken into account, the additional time preparing meals, cleaning up meals, planning, all these things we haven't really taken into account. The only thing that we see is that, okay, we don't travel anymore to go to work, we just stay at home. But there are a lot of things that we haven't considered, and the emotional toil as well, the emotional energy that we're spending, we haven't really consciously taken that into account. So that's actually quite refreshing that you've raised that.
Yeah, and I think that it's something that an area that we can give ourselves a little bit of grace in. If we can understand that this tiredness is not necessarily being burnt out, is just being part of this collective change that's happening right now, then we can allow ourselves a little bit of grace and a little bit of
Mm.
leeway around being productive and being, all of these things that people are pushing right now. You said for you, it doesn't change very much because you work online. For me, it's half and half. Half of my work is in an acupuncture office in New York City, and half of my work is online. So half of my work hasn't changed, and half of my work has totally disappeared. And so there is some shift for me. And I realize and acknowledge that I'm in an especially privileged position right now because I don't have the burden of worrying about if I can afford to go grocery shopping this week, which I did grow up with. I grew up in an environment where that was a concern. I waited until there was holes in my shoes before I said, really, Mom, I need a new pair, because I
Just like
knew
that.
that, yeah, well, I knew that for my parents, it wasn't feasible for me to just get new shoes whenever I wanted them. And even
Mm.
sometimes when I needed them, I had to wait a little bit. So I did grow up in this environment where I still have many, many friends, and they are in a position that the emotional burden that they are carrying now is even heavier, because not only are they in this collective change, but also they're worried about the fact that they just got laid off, their unemployment hasn't come in yet, and they have to feed their children.
Mm.
So there's a lot of really big worries happening in the world right now. And so I feel like that that sort of general fatigue is totally acceptable. And what differentiates that fatigue from actual burnout is on a physiological and a neurological level. When you are tired because of a collective experience, you go to sleep at night and you regenerate, and you wake up
You're
in the
refreshed.
morning and you are refreshed. Maybe you're a little bit tireder than you would be on a regular day because you wake up and you think, oh my God, there's so many things happening, and the world is, gone to hell in a handbasket, and I don't know what to do. But when you're burnt out, usually when you're about to go to bed, you turn you turn on this system that we call tired but wired. That you've
Okay.
been tired for 2 or 3 hours, and then you lay down and your brain starts going and you can't fall asleep.
It's still ticking
It's still ticking. It's still ticking. So you're going, you're going, you're going. And then you sleep, but your sleep is not as deep as it normally would
because it is still ticking.
because it's still ticking, and your nervous system, when you sleep, your parasympathetic nervous system is supposed to sort of take over. And your parasympathetic nervous system is responsible for rest, digest, reproduction, making sure your blood gets to where it needs to go, making sure your
All
food
the
gets digested,
automatic
all these
system.
this breathing, deep breathing, and all of this natural stuff that should happen while you're sleeping. And so during the day, the sympathetic nervous system is sort of a little bit busier, keeps us going, keeps us going, keeps us going. And at night, we're supposed to have this shift.
Mm-hmm.
And in Chinese medicine, this is the shift from yang to yin, right? This is so we're supposed to have this shift, but when you're burnt out, you don't shift. You
Wow.
stay in sympathetic nervous system activation 24 hours a day, and your body never truly gets the rest and recovery that it needs. So you wake up the next morning and you might be even tireder than when you went to bed the
And it's
night
a
before.
downward
Yeah.
spiral because you're tired. Maybe that's where the lyric came from. You are tired but you can't sleep, or something like that. One of the
Yeah.
Coldplay songs.
Yeah.
You feel so tired but you just can't sleep. Your body is not getting the rest that it
Yeah.
actually needs.
Yes. Yeah. And it happens, the thing with the fatigue that's happening now is everybody's sort of experiencing, a lot of people are experiencing this sort of general tiredness right now. And it happened within the past couple of weeks with a major shift in the global everything, global economy,
Hmm.
global everything. And burnout tends to be this thing where it happens slowly over a very long period of time. You're
Yeah.
getting progressively more tired, and you don't accept it or recognize it because your stress level hasn't necessarily gone up. So you explain to yourself, well, 5 years ago, I could handle that stress just fine. So why can't I do it now?
Because it progressed so
Because
deep.
right. Because you've been sort of breaking down your own ability to handle that stress over time. So even if it literally is, if before you had 50 points of stress every day and your body only handled 48 of them, and you're carrying over 2 every day, for 10 years, then you think you're still dealing with 50 points of stress, but really you're dealing with 154 points of stress.
And yeah, and especially when it's actually taking a toll on your physiology, the way your
Yeah.
body operates, then you cannot really recuperate. It's going to get harder to recover when you are in that position. So yeah, I can totally see the difference now between being tired and burned out. Burned out is a little bit, well, not a little bit, but much further down the line, because you've actually spiraled, and it is it's manifesting in a physiological way. Whereas with tired, your energy level is low. You can recover if you have some rest, maybe not to
Yeah.
100%, but
But
yeah, you are still able
yes.
to regenerate and recover
Yeah.
from the tiredness of the previous day or the previous
Right.
weeks.
Right.
So
Right.
I am assuming, Caitlin, that you've experienced burned out yourself. How deep were you in your burnout?
I just recently shifted the way I was speaking about this, changed my language around it, because I was saying on my podcast and on, with various guests and with various clients that I burnt out twice. And sometimes I was saying that I burnt out 3 times, and I couldn't really figure out how many times I really burnt out
Was it
until
just once?
yeah, exactly. Until I realized that I was sort of caught on a burnout cycle for a long time. So I burnt out really seriously the first time just before I turned 30, when I was at the top of my game. I had an acupuncture practice in Warsaw, Poland. I had a 3-month waiting list. I was on, talk shows and in magazines, and it was all very,
Busy.
successful,
Yeah.
right? But it was way overwhelming for me. I did not have my boundaries in the right place. I didn't understand that I was abandoning my own energy all the time. There was a lot going on that I really wasn't understanding. And so what I would do was do some life coaching, give myself some acupuncture, get some Chinese herbs, feel, 10% better, assume that meant that I was strong enough to handle my life, and then realize a couple months later that I was still
You're
feeling
back.
really terrible. And then,
Yeah.
and I kind of stayed on that cycle for almost 10 years, for about 8
Wow.
years,
Did you
because
start getting sick?
I gained weight. My thyroid just was completely shot. I got so tired that the type of fatigue that happens with burnout is often accompanied by atrophy of your muscles. So
Mm.
as someone who exercised my whole life, I ended up being at a point where I couldn't walk up a hill for 4 minutes from the tram to my apartment without taking breaks. Now,
Mm.
I was a competitive gymnast. Like, I've exercised 12, 15 hours a week for most of my life, and I
Right.
couldn't walk up a hill for 4 minutes.
Yeah, that's something. Your body actually is telling you that something's not right here.
Yeah, and it wasn't until I read the word burnout for the first time that I actually started realizing what was happening. Because I felt like when you are a specialist in Chinese medicine, you automatically are an expert in stress management. Because stress management has been part of Chinese medical literature and practice for thousands of years.
Mm-hmm.
Literally thousands of years. So we always talk about this. So I sort of, a little bit of an ego thing, I wouldn't accept that I was in this position because I should know better.
Sure. Yeah. It's the same, I suppose, with doctors and other professionals in their field. I'm a health psychologist myself. And I would say, I'm not, surely I'm not susceptible to mental health problems. And,
Right.
it's
Which
like,
is like crazy when you say it
yeah.
out loud.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, I know. But actually, sort of, in your head.
Yeah, of
But when it
course.
actually hits you on a personal level, then that's actually something else, and you're not even fully aware that it's happening to you. So
Right.
is that what happened to your
Yeah.
case then?
Yes, absolutely. And I
So
had a
what
really
was your
hard
wake
time.
up call?
After I had sort of gone through the cycle enough times, I had already, my thyroid let go, and then I fixed it with Chinese medicine, herbs, and functional medicine and diet. I didn't go on meds. I didn't do any of that. I lost the weight. I got back to myself, and then a couple years later it happened again, and then a couple years
Yeah,
later it started happening,
you're
and I was like,
actually still there. Yeah,
exactly. I was like, this has been 8 years and I feel like nothing is changing, which means that the work that I'm doing is either not deep enough or not significant enough. And I need to stop and figure this out. And that was about 3 years ago. And I spent a year and a half recovering and researching. My husband at the time was doing an postgraduate program at Cambridge, and so I had access to all of the
resources.
university libraries. So
Yeah.
I downloaded every single piece of research on burnout that existed, and I read through them one by one, by one, by one.
Excellent. What did you find?
I found that one of the things that actually was troublesome for me was that almost every single piece of research is about the workplace.
Oh,
So the
okay.
focus has not really been too much on the individual. There's been a lot of focus on the workplace. But
The
when you're an
environment.
entrepreneur,
Hmm.
so
What's the
what
workplace?
right. So I had to start really looking into how to transfer the research that was already there into being applicable for people like me.
Sure.
So what does that mean for entrepreneurs? What does that mean for the space that we create? And when I started digging into the spiritual side of it and the Chinese medicine side of it a little bit more, the biggest thing that I noticed, and the thing that changed everything for me, was noticing that my habit in life was to abandon myself energetically, leave myself behind, because I'm a healer. My job is to be in your energy so that I can empathize, so I can literally feel what you're feeling,
To serve
so that I
someone
know
else. Mm.
how to serve you.
Mm.
Exactly. And I was very good at my job because of this skill.
Mm.
But what I didn't realize was that I was using this skill in the grocery store and at the gym and in the hallways and in the elevator and I had to learn how to separate myself from being a people pleaser and being good to everyone all the time to being focused enough where I could choose to use this energy on purpose in this way when I'm one-on-one with somebody or in a group setting, because I do group coaching as well, but
But
at the
not
time
all the time.
but not keep it on all the time.
Mm.
And when I started paying attention to all of this abandonment of my own self, I realized that part of this process meant that I was unable to recognize how people were serving me because I wasn't
Mm.
present to receive anything. So I was walking around my house saying, I'm doing everything, not noticing that my husband is always the one who vacuums. My husband is always the
Right.
one who fills the dog's water bowl. My
To
husband is
also
always the one.
notice when you are receiving and to show gratitude,
Yeah,
to
you
feel that.
can't.
Mm.
You can't. It's not possible because your energy is somewhere else. If you're not in there to receive it, you can't receive it. And you also lose the ability completely to understand your own wants, needs, and desires because you're not
Right.
present to feel them.
Right. Okay. So you really need to tap into to your own energy and what sort of energy you're taking in instead of you just always tapping out. Is that what it is?
For me, it's more about, instead of taking energy in, it's more about keeping your energy in your body.
Right.
Instead of, so here's just an example. My husband was working in the office. This was a few years ago, but it's an example I use a lot because a lot of people understand it. My husband was in the other room in the office. I was home. I hadn't gone to my office yet, and he slammed his hand on the desk and swore about something. And I'm in the other room. I have no idea what he's swearing about, but automatically, because his emotion made me uncomfortable and I'm a healer and I want it to shift and be better,
Mm.
I went into the living room to check if the Wi-Fi was working properly.
Okay.
He didn't say anything about the Wi-Fi. The Wi-Fi was fine. He just gotten a shitty email. But I was fixing a problem that no one asked me to fix, that didn't exist.
Right. Interesting.
Right? Because my energy was
Always.
over there. I
Yeah,
heard
yeah.
I heard a reaction and all my energy went there immediately. And instead of staying in my body and saying, I'm okay, no matter what he's going through, I'm safe and I'm okay. And he's an adult and he can handle his emotional reactions on his own. He's perfectly capable. He has the resources. He's fine.
You're always trying to fix things at that point.
But so many of us are. And when you are a mother,
Mm.
this becomes magnified by 1,000 because the first 6 years of a child's life, neurophysiologically, that's actually your job
Yeah.
until they start to do things themselves. But a lot of us don't let go of those moments and don't allow them to do things themselves because we're so accustomed after those 6, 7, 8 years of doing things, of being so in tune with them so that we can solve their problems before they come up,
So I can actually see why burnout is really common, especially in the caring professions,
Yeah.
professions where you actually give, for therapists, for carers,
Yeah.
nurses, actually even teachers, when you're actually
Yeah.
giving and serving so much, you can see the incidence of burnout really skyrocket in these professions. So as the burnout expert, what is the first step that you would suggest if someone recognizes that, okay, I think I am burned out? What is the first step that they need to take?
This is going to sound very counterintuitive because it's like anti everything Instagram tells you to do. What I don't want you to do is start a gratitude journal, excuse my language.
Okay.
Because when you're not in your body, when you're not present, when you are burnt out, there are actual brain changes that happen that mean that you can't absorb the feelings of gratitude the way that you can otherwise, which means that its power just doesn't really work for you. So this is another sign that you're burnt out. Like when you're doing all of the proper life coaching, spiritual growth, personal growth techniques, and they're not
And it's
working
still
for
not
you,
working. Yeah.
you're probably burnt out, because if your brain is not in a position to actually absorb these things, none of
It's not
those
gonna
things will
work.
work.
Okay.
So people that have a really hard time meditating, people that have a hard time with gratitude journals, people that have a hard time with, etc. So the thing that I ask people to do often is, instead of a gratitude journal, to start a resentment journal.
Interesting. Okay.
So
Continue.
if you start a resentment journal and you start paying attention to where all the mini irritations are in your life and where you're feeling resentment, is always a sign that you
Mm,
gave more than you think you got. And if you start looking at it, you'll find some patterns. One of the patterns will likely be you're giving things to people that are not asking for it, and you're
right.
just trying to help. And people are not responding well, and they're not taking your advice, and they're not listening to what you have to say because they don't
They
actually want
didn't
your
ask
help.
for it. Yeah.
Right? So you'll start to notice these patterns. And when you see them, instead of creating boundaries to the outside world and saying, okay, I feel resentful, so now, like, I don't want you to do this, and I'm going to allow myself to say no. This is an assertiveness type practice. And there's a lot of assertiveness type practices, but unless your energy is in your own body, the assertiveness type practices don't matter. So your job is to look at that resentment list and ask yourself how many of those things you can give back to the person that they belong to, and with a dose of trust that that person will either ask you for specific help if they need it, or find other resources to get them through whatever trouble they're experiencing.
Right.
So
Okay.
to give away the responsibility for things that you've automatically taken the responsibility for that do not actually belong to you.
That's actually liberating, because
Yeah.
for people who are trying to help everyone,
Yeah.
and the help isn't really needed, it's just in your nature that you want to give,
Yes.
and you're taking all the energy out, but it's
Yeah.
not really necessary.
No, and
It's
it's
a
not
waste.
helpful. It's a
Yeah.
waste. I call it an energy leak. And
Mm.
in addition to it being an energy leak, it's really, at the end of the day, it's kind of rude. We think we do it from a good place.
Mm.
We think that we're being nice and helpful, but the 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 energy behind it really is, I'm better at this than you are. I don't
Let me
trust that
do
you.
it.
Mhm. Let me tell you how to fix this, because you obviously don't know how. And so what you're doing by injecting help into places where it's not needed is disempowering other people from being able to solve their problems by themselves.
That is so liberating. That is amazing. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, it is actually quite an anti um feel good advice,
Yeah,
everybody would say gratitude, but I actually am one of those people who would say, practice gratitude, but that's actually at a later stage, when you are in a
exactly.
position where you're not so burned out anymore, because when you are at that place where you're not ready to, especially with the yin and yang, it takes a bit of time to actually get there. And when
Yeah.
you're not there yet, it's not going to
Forcing it is
work.
not going to help.
That's
Yeah.
right. That's
Yeah.
exactly that. And for me, some of the things that I talk about in my books, for example, all these inner critic messages, some people would say crush it. And so, for me, it does take a bit of time, listen
Yeah.
to it, have a talk with it. You don't have to shoo it away and, just mask it with all the niceness and goodness. Sometimes we feel fear, we feel anxiety, we feel burned out. Yeah, that happens. And when you actually acknowledge that, yes, you feel resentment, you feel anger, you
Yeah.
feel all these what's called, dark emotions, it's part of your human experience. And when
Yes.
you're trying to mask it by putting all of the positivity and ignoring that, these emotions exist, you're not actually being true to your human nature. And yeah, you are right, it's almost like you're trying to get there but you're not there yet.
Yeah.
And whatever you
Yeah.
try to do, all the meditation and it's not going to work because you're not ready to
Yeah.
be in that place yet.
This is in the book that I wrote, which will be out sometime this summer. It's being edited right now, which is so fun. I can't wait for the first edit to come back. The number 3 reason, I have 7 reasons why we burn out, and then exercises what to do about each of those reasons. And the 3rd reason that we burn out is spiritual bypassing, which is exactly what you're talking about now, right? Having a difficult situation and then trying to find the silver lining and put a positive spin on it before you're actually ready to feel that, without giving yourself the time and space to experience as a
Mm.
human being this thing that you're going through.
Yeah, yeah.
It's really
It's
important for you to
almost
say.
like you jump to the positive, to the light, but you still need to experience this, and in time, when
Yeah.
you're ready, take baby steps, and actually to recognize that it is part of your human, of
Yes.
your human experience. You will have to go through this cycle. I mean, for me, when I was experiencing burnout, I'm not sure if I'm out. I think I am because I'm just tired now, but I don't I remember when I was sick all the time. I
Yeah.
was getting IBS. I was
Yeah.
sick all the time. I was getting palpitations, panic
Yep.
attacks, and so on.
Yep.
I
Yep.
Since I left my job as an academic, because that's where all my resentment, not it was
Yeah.
I resentful? Yes, I think I was.
Yes. I promise you were.
Yeah, I think I was when I actually did let go, and I said, enough, that's
Yeah.
enough, I've had enough. When I actually took the autonomy and the control back of my life, and say, okay, I might look like I'm the most ungrateful person, after being in that position for so long, and just to shut the door and leave the stink behind.
Yeah.
I had to experience all of that, but I acknowledge that I am human.
Yeah.
And by recognizing that, I'm able to talk about the mental health difficulties, the physical difficulties that I had to go through, and the process of healing.
Yeah.
I understand that in terms of forgiveness, I'm still processing
Working.
things. I do talk to like spiritual coaches, and I do talk about forgiveness. I say I really do want to forgive. I think I'm getting there. It's not something that you think. It's
No.
actually when you forgive, it's actually you
A
feel
physical
that,
release and
yeah,
emotional
it's a
thing. Yeah.
physical release. So I'm getting there. And the more I take myself out as far away as possible, then it's a process. But recognizing that it is a process
Yeah.
without having to rush it, it can be quite liberating. And for me, as far as burnout, I actually do feel better physically. I feel
Yeah.
the burden off my shoulders. And I feel more optimistic about the future, rather than being in that really really dark place that I was
Yeah.
in.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, in your case, how do you feel now? I mean, if how did you liberate yourself from the burnout? What did that look like?
So it's interesting because what you just said is actually really important and something that I think people need to understand. There are always 2 sides of burnout. There's the internal side and the external side. And in my experience, most of my stuff was internal. Like about halfway through. In the beginning, some of it was external, it was the situation I was in, but later on it was mostly internal, my own stuff. It sounds like your experience was most of your burnout experience was an external piece. So when you eliminated that external piece, you're able to heal. And so people need to understand that sometimes it's 50-50, sometimes it's 80-20, and sometimes you don't know how much of it is internal until you change the external multiple times and you find yourself in
And
the
to
same
look in,
position
yeah, to look,
over and
yeah.
over, right? Then you realize that it's more of an internal thing, but it can be external. If you have a micromanaging boss who has no respect for you and doesn't give you any praise, and then cuts your hours and your money, and like sleeps with your husband, or whatever, like that, those are external reasons that you can burn out that have nothing to do with you or abandoning your own energy. It's just that you happen to be in a crappy situation. And so I think it's really important to recognize that that is part of burnout. And there's always some sort of internal piece, but the balance between internal and external factors for your burnout is different in every single person.
Mm. That's
Most of
really
mine,
important.
it's really important to notice that, because I think sometimes people think that they can fix themselves and stay in abusive, unsafe situations.
Mm.
And I say abusive on purpose,
Yeah, yeah.
because you wouldn't be reacting in a way that leads you to burnout if it wasn't dangerous enough in some way. You burn out because you feel unsafe and you're trying to protect yourself in that kind of situation, right? So I think it's really important to recognize the internal and external factors of burnout. For me, so much of my burnout was tied into my feelings of self-worth, of I'm going to be a good person when I'm successful. I will be appreciated when I make it. If I help enough people, then I'll be able to whatever. If I make enough money, then I'll be good enough. If this, then that was so much of my time. And it's why my energy was always somewhere else, because I was saying, okay, well, I need to help this person and do this thing and check off this thing in order to be successful, in order to be loved, in order to be appreciated, in order to survive. And so I really had to work very hard on keeping my energy to myself. Mm-hmm. So when my husband swears in the other room, to stop and say, he's a resourceful, strong, intelligent man. And I trust that he can handle this situation, and that if he does need my help, he can come to me and ask me for it specifically and let me know exactly what it is that he needs. And if I am in a position at that moment to give it to him, then I can do so. I do not need to solve this problem. It does not belong to me. Right? And so this is the thing that really saved me. I started paying attention to this everywhere, and I noticed that I do this with people, and I did it with inanimate objects as well.
Oh, wow. In what way?
You'll be surprised, because almost all of us do this in different ways. But
say more.
One example for me was, I was ironing one day. I took my husband's shirts and I was ironing one day, and I noticed that halfway through the second shirt, I was like full muscle. Like my whole arm was like pumped up, and I was like really working to move this iron. We had just moved back to the United States like a month earlier. So the iron that I'm using is brand new.
Okay.
Top of the line, brand new. It does not require my strength. This is not 1930. I did not warm it up over an open fire. Like, this is a brand new tool that works very well when you just push it back and forth.
Yeah.
Really lightly. And all my effort was in it, because there's this belief
that you have to put in effort,
that you have to work hard or else it's not valuable.
Wow. Interesting.
And when I tell this story in workshops, in corporate workshops, and in like bigger groups of people, 20, 50, 150 people, the things that I hear are so funny. You know, people are like, oh my God, you should see me when I vacuum. I'm like the Hulk, you know? Yeah, like,
you just need to like glide it.
You just, yeah. And even silly things like, if you don't replace the pan that you cook your eggs in the morning, and your eggs stick to the pan every single morning, and every single morning you're annoyed because your eggs are sticking to the pan, this is an area where you're losing energy, where you're not taking care of yourself, because it's, you know, wasteful to throw out a pan, or because you can handle this, it's not that bad, or because you're not even paying attention to the ways that you could make your life better and easier. For yourself.
Yeah.
Right?
So it's actually paying attention to how you use your energy, and even the thought processes, like the things that you tell yourself.
Yeah.
That you have to solve everything.
Well, and I'll give another example, because I think this is something that happened to me actually last week, and I shared it a few times, and every time I shared it, people were like, oh my God, I do that. And I was like, okay, well, this is a good one. I'll write it down. I made breakfast for myself first thing in the morning. My husband exercised first thing in the morning, so he just had a shake. which means that he'll have breakfast 2 or 3 hours later. He'll make like a proper big breakfast. But I had an English muffin sandwich. So I took my English muffin and I toasted it first. And I like English muffins to be like really well toasted. Like I want it to be crispy. So I turned my toaster all the way up to 6, which is the highest setting. And I toasted my English muffin and I had my little sandwich and it was delicious.
Okay.
3 hours later, my husband made himself breakfast and I wasn't paying attention. He just made himself breakfast. He sat down to eat it. I went into the kitchen to get a glass of water. I look over at his plate in the dining room and I notice that his bagel is burnt.
Okay.
And the first thing that I thought, even though I've been doing this process for a couple of years, my automatic reaction, which didn't last very long because I'm able to stop it now and shift into a different frame of mind, but my automatic reaction was, oh my God, I didn't turn the toaster back on after I used it.
Okay, you just assumed that it was you.
Right. I assumed it was me. I assumed it was my fault. And I assumed it was my responsibility to change it. Should I offer to, and then my head starts going, should I offer to get him a new bagel? I really need to pay attention to making sure the toaster oven is back down. And then I stopped and I laughed and I thought, well, that's silly. First of all, he's not complaining about it being burnt at all.
It's not a problem for him.
It's not a problem for him. So again, I'm solving
You're
a problem
trying to
that doesn't
fix
exist.
that's yeah.
Not there. Second of all, he's 40 years old. He can check the setting on the toaster for himself if he wants to. And if it's wasteful and it's not what I suggest, but if he really wanted to, he could have gotten out another bagel and toasted it at a lighter setting. Like there's so many solutions to this.
Yeah, and you're trying to fix it, that it's not even a problem.
It's not even a problem. But my automatic reaction was, you did something bad. You didn't think of other people. You need to pay attention to, right? And we do this all the time in really small ways.
And you get so drained as a result of that. I think
it's such an energy leak.
That's actually really helpful. I mean, for many people in our community, in the PAMI Code Facebook group, it's called Living with Purpose. And the people in the community are really purpose driven. They are givers, a lot of healers, people who just want to serve. And you can see so many of them getting burned out, because they are giving so much and they're not really aware of the energy leaks. As you've said, they just want to make the world a better place, which is actually quite noble, but at the expense of their own health and well-being. Right. So if you're unwell, how are you going to serve others? So it's actually really, I like this conversation because it reminds us to be aware of those energy leaks, our thought processes, how we respond to problems that probably aren't our responsibility or probably aren't problems in the first place, and how much energy we are exerting and how much energy we are losing to the point that we get burned out in the process. Right. So that's really enlightening, Caitlin. Thank you very much for sharing your stories. I love how you just share, stories. It makes it so real and it makes it so alive. But if people want to get in touch with you and learn more about burnout and your acupuncture practice, how can they get in touch? How can they connect with you at this time?
I think that the best place for me almost always is Instagram, because that's where I spend so much of my time. And so my Instagram is at Kate_Donovan. And I think that's really where I spend a lot of time. And that's really where almost all of the advice comes up. And I also have a podcast called Fried, the Burnout Podcast, which I've been told, and I think is a really great resource for people who are in a place where they haven't maybe yet made the decision to heal, but would like some time and space to drop the shame and judgment and guilt around burning out. Because I've talked to people from every walk of life that have been through everything you can imagine. And so it takes away some of this like self-blame and self-judgment and self-guilt around burnout, which is why the podcast exists. And I think that this is really, really rather important. So the podcast is called Fried, the Burnout Podcast, and you can find it anywhere you listen to podcasts. It's all over the place. So I think those are the two best places to sort of, buzz around my circle if there's something that interests you and something that you'd like to know more about.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much, Kate. And I like again that last bit, take away the shame. Because some people, yeah, when
Yeah.
they experience burnout, they say, oh, it's my fault that I'm feeling this way. But it happens, we are
Yeah.
human. It
And most of the
happens.
time, these reactions that we have, the reason that I'm worried about the toaster being on six is because of some sort of trauma that I experienced as a child. It's not my fault that I'm doing that. That was a reaction that I created
It's
to
a
keep
learned
myself safe.
response. Yeah.
Yeah. I did that to keep myself safe when I was 4. Like, and now I still repeat it. That's not my fault.
Yeah, and these things you can, when you become aware, coming from, again, from a psychologist's
Yeah.
perspective, when you become aware of your thought processes, when you become aware of your response
Yeah.
to what's going on around you, then you can make a conscious decision
Exactly.
to change it. Because right now you're just automatically responding because that's how it is. We are ultimately animals who respond to stimulus, and
Yeah.
when you become aware of how you're responding, you can change those automatic responses and
Exactly.
shift it. But it has to start from awareness first, accepting that this actually exists, and make the conscious decision to actually change it.
Yeah, totally agree.
So thank
Thank you
you
so much for
again,
having me.
Caitlin. And for everyone who's tuning in, I hope that you found this conversation helpful. When it comes to burnout, just be aware that it exists. And if you do need some support and guidance, you can listen to this conversation again, or check out Caitlin's podcast. Sounds like, it's something that you can pick up, like tidbits everywhere, pockets of useful information in there to help you to be ready, to actually make that change, and eventually make that change, and recover from burnout. So thank you, Caitlin. Thanks, everyone, and we'll catch up again next time for another purposeful conversation here in the Pami Code Facebook group. Until then, take care, everyone, and bye for now. Bye.